Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Lindsey Byrd and Writing is Hard. Today's topic is going to be covering forgiveness and what it means to incorporate forgiveness. How does it impact a revenge redemption story? And also the arc of creating a suspense novel where the forgiveness may or may not come to fruition at the end. We shall see. Today's author interview is with Samantha Crewson. Samantha graduated from the University of California, Davis with a degree in political science. A proud queer woman, she currently resides in California's Inland Empire with her partner Hannah and their many cats. When she isn't drafting her next novel or arguing with insurance adjusters for her day job, she enjoys reading, playing video games, and drinking copious amounts of coffee. Her 2025 debut novel just released on the 22nd of April and is entitled Every Sweet Thing is Bitter. Its backup book blurb reads, 13 years ago, Providence Byrd threw the family car in reverse and ran over her mother. Even though her mother survived, that single instant of teenage madness made Providence a felon and irrevocably altered her life. When her mother disappears years later under suspicious circumstances, Providence tells herself that returning home is her chance to find closure after prolonged estrangement from her family. Never mind that this is only half the truth. She's also returning to finally confront her abusive father, Tom Byrd. Nothing can stamp out Providence's certainty that he is guilty of whatever terrible thing has happened to her mother. As the search unfolds, Providence is haunted by the wounds of her past, none of which cut as deep as the distance between her and her younger sisters. Harmony and Grace are both uniquely scarred by her attempted matricide, and both have their own idea of what reconciliations might look like, if reconciling is even possible. Harmony urges Providence to make their father pay for his sins. Grace begs her to end the cycle of violence that has haunted their family for generations. As her thirst for vengeance collides with her desire to heal her relationships with her sisters, Providence must decide what she values more, revenge or redemption. So just to start us off, there's a lot of rage in this blurb. What made this particular emotion so compelling to write about?
I have always loved to read books about female rage. That's always, I think that's a very beloved subgenre for a reason. And I really wanted to tackle it in a way that was very like raw and gritty because I feel like in crime fiction, especially, there's a lot of room for male rage. And we don't label it male rage, but it's always the men get to be angry and the women are just sort of there in a lot of crime fiction. And I really wanted to give a woman a chance to experience an emotion that is very often reserved for men in crime fiction, because I think when we think of like really like gritty and hard to read and dark books where men are driven by a desire for revenge. One of the examples that comes to mind for me right now would be Razor Blade Tears by S.A. Cosby, which is one of my favorite books ever. S.A. Cosby is one of the best to do it in crime fiction. But those two men, Ike and Buddy Lee, are very much driven by rage and a desire for revenge. And I wanted to tell a story like that and take that emotion and give it to a woman um, without her just being like someone who gives a lot of like sharp one liners, or she's stabby or something like that. I really wanted to dive into like the depths and the darkness that rage can have for everyone, but especially for women.
What do you think would be the difference? Because, like you said earlier, when we use rage generally, the male rage part is implied. Like, oh, rage is the masculine. We don't need to say that man is having male rage. But when a woman is experiencing rage, now it's female rage. What would be the difference, or is there a difference between saying female rage versus male rage?
I think we like to label it female rage because I think it's very underportrayed in media in general, not just in books, but TV, movies, any media that we could point to. And so I think that pointing it out and specifically identifying it as female rage is a way of trying to get women into that conversation, if you will. Even though I think at the end of the day, rage is just rage. It doesn't matter if it's felt by a man, a woman, a non-binary person. rage is just rage, but I think that we're still trying to normalize the expression of rage in women. I feel like, and this is saying absolutely nothing that hasn't been said before, it's not an acceptable emotion for women to feel. We don't like when women are angry, or when they are, we expect them to head for like a redemption arc, a forgiveness arc, realizing, oh, like I can be compassionate. And I don't always think that's true to life.
I think something that's interesting with the presentation of female rage and the different medias that I've seen it presented in is when a woman finally exhibits rage, there's been a boiling point that's been accelerated for a very long time. It's not a instantaneous thing. It's a you had a mountain of stuff that has led to this moment and now we've exploded.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like the straw that broke the camel's back sort of thing.
yeah, because there is that cultural element, at least in Western culture, where women are not permitted to experience that type of emotion publicly. And
Mm-hmm.
so because you spend so much time holding it back, when you
Mm-hmm.
finally have that moment to, or not even a conscious choice of being like, now I'm going to be angry, when it finally just explodes, it explodes. Um, do you find when you're writing this character or this character's experiencing this type of emotion, there's a different way of actually writing that experience on the page versus where you might write it perhaps differently with a male character experiencing that emotion?
I That's a really good question. I I don't know that I would present it differently in a male character. I think the biggest difference would be Providence has like a lifetime of abuse and neglect that has led her to this point. So in a way, it is a reflection of that boiling point. And finally, I mean, you could argue one boiling point is running over her mother, but then she continues to boil because she goes to prison and she has to navigate life as a formerly incarcerated woman. And so she starts to boil again. And I think the biggest difference would be I don't know that a man would simmer for that long before boiling, if you know what I mean. I think men are much more quick to act on their rage. And I do think women, we will sit with it longer because, again, I think that's ingrained from society where we really want to try to stay away from that emotion. We're like, okay, if I sit with it, maybe it'll go away. And whereas I think a man will just like have the knee jerk reaction of I'm angry and I'm going to act on that somehow. So I think the timing of that would be the biggest difference in how I think that would be portrayed in a man versus a woman.
Without giving spoilers, if this is possible, please tell me if it's not possible.
Okay.
When you're actually writing a character who's experiencing this type of emotion, are there moments that you write in to show what that feeling is throughout? Like, for instance, I can think of like personally when I'm really upset, standing in line in a coffee shop might make me agitated, so I'm a little bit more brusque with somebody who absolutely does not deserve it.
Yeah.
Things like that, where you see the rage in other forms before you get to the big explosion or the big action later.
Yeah, I think that's woven throughout a bit and in a way that where I think that's how a woman would express it. She has this interaction where I can't say what the scene is based on because that would be spoilery, but with a woman who insults her and basically says, yeah, I never expected you to amount to anything. You're trash. Your whole family's always been trash. And whereas I think at a less angry point in her life, Providence might have been like, okay, well, go away, instead she tells this woman like when you die I hope your husband brings a date to your funeral. And I it's a very sick burn that I was proud of. But like little sort of displays of rebellion like that, there are little areas where you can kind of see that she's getting to that point with other people, but it just sort of keeps like a slow and steady boil throughout.
I know that when I'm writing, there are a couple of things like humor or the sick burn that in my real life, I am physically incapable of actually coming up with something like that on the fly. Like I just was like somebody will say something and then like an hour later I'll be like, I know the response.
Yeah.
When you're writing, do these things come immediately naturally, or is it you're like, I can write it, but I can't do it in real life?
Oh yeah, I can write it, but I could not. If someone said something like that to me, I would probably just swear at them profusely and then leave, or probably not say anything at all, depending on the context. But in that way, it's kind of freeing to be able to sit and go, okay, like let's put this woman in her place. Like, what can I say, or what can I have this character say that would really like wound this person that's being terrible to her? So in that way, it's like the idealized, I don't want to say idealized, maybe it's slightly idealized version of me where I'm like quicker on my feet and I could give like a really witty comeback to that. So that was a lot of fun for me. Actually, I really loved writing that sick little bird. I thought it was great.
Well, it's a bit of catharsis. You're just like, I couldn't do that in my real life, but if somebody said something now, I could be, the hero that has,
Yeah,
the
exactly. I would
line.
have the chance to have that one liner.
Um, Kind of following with that thread, do you find catharsis in general with either reading or writing books that are dealing with this type of emotionally heavy content that you might not get otherwise, and while you're going about your normal day-to-day life?
Yeah, I love reading and writing really heavy things. It's kind of a joke, like on, I don't know if you have Storygraph, but at the end of every year, they give you like a little graph with your reading moods. And like, if this is the graph, up here is like, wow, you read a lot of happy books. And down here is your books are like misery and pain. And my whole graph is like this. And personally, I don't think that's totally okay. I read one rom-com last year and I really loved it. It was Here for the Wrong Reasons, fantastic sapphic rom-com. So I really like to read dark things. I like books about grief. That's I don't know what that says about me. I hope my psychiatrist doesn't see this. But as far as writing about it, there's a level of catharsis where I feel like it's nice to be able to have those thoughts and get them on page and act out like a revenge fantasy or something of that nature. It's hard for me to say it's completely cathartic because unlike Providence, I did not grow up in an abusive home. I have two really loving parents. The biggest piece of catharsis for me in writing this book was that well, there were two. Providence self-harms, and I self-harmed when I was younger, and I think that's not seen a lot in fiction. And it was, in a way, it was very freeing for me to explore the emotions behind that because I remember it from me personally when I would self-harm, and to give that emotion to another character was very healing for me in a lot of ways. And the other way I would say is there's this ongoing thread of religious trauma, which I also have. I went to Christian school when I was really young, and I was bullied really terribly, especially at the end. And just the ongoing idea, because in my life and in Providence's, there were always people around me who could have and should have helped me, but didn't step in. And I feel like that's an experience that Providence really relates to, where there are people all around town in this small town of 90 some people who know that her father is an abusive monster, her mom is neglectful alcoholic, and nobody really does anything, or if they do, it's very limited. And just the idea of people with a lot of like religious morals and love thy neighbor, the golden rule, who see you suffering and then like don't come in and help. So it was cathartic in a way for me to live that out again. And there's a scene toward the end where she's really able to like, put a voice to that feeling about there are people that helped me and did what they could, but it wasn't enough. And yeah, that was very freeing. I felt like I got to leave a little bit of my religious trauma in the past. It's still there, but I got to leave a little bit of it on the page.
What do you hope when people read this book that they'll take away from it?
I would like people to take away that women don't have to be paragons of virtue to have their stories told. And I don't think that's saying anything new, but I do think that when we're given characters, like morally gray female characters, women with a lot of rage, I feel like the expectation is to have them come full circle and realize, I'm going to take the high road. I'm going to be the bigger person. I'm going to choose forgiveness. And while I think that sometimes that can be very healing, there's a line in my book that I think sums up how I feel about it, which is that if everyone takes the high road, no one ever gets their comeuppance. And I think sometimes it's okay to hold on to a grudge. It's okay to not forgive someone who wounded you really deeply, because I think we have the expectation that women will always forgive and ultimately always choose to be softer and gentler. And I really just wanted to challenge that and say, okay, well, why can't women be hardened and gritty? Because again, I think we go back to, it would be okay for a man to not have that realization in the end. It would be okay for a man to go on a bloody revenge quest and murder all these people in his wake, and then at the end go, yep, I did that, and we're satisfied with that ending. But if a woman does that, we're like, well, why wasn't she more open-hearted? Why didn't she want to forgive? And I don't like that double standard. I don't like that expectation, and I want people to chew on that a little bit more.
I admit, while you were talking, all I could think of was Kill Bill,
Oh
where,
my, I've never seen Kill Bill, but my dad's name is Bill.
oh
So I
gosh,
always like, I don't know why I've like always like had that movie in my mind, but I've never seen it.
it's a stereotypical Tarantino film.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, go say less. I know exactly what it is now.
okay, good. Um, but its main premise is basically that she does not forgive. She goes on the killing spree. She's like, the point is to kill Bill. Like
Mhm.
that's her point. Something
Yeah,
happened. She went on a revenge tour, and that was the point of the movie.
I love.
Um, and it's just interesting because I remember when it came out, everybody was really excited about the shock of this woman going around. She's like, no, I'm going to kill everybody who gets in my way. I've got a mission, and this is what I'm going to do. And because it has the Tarantino aspect of it, there's the gore and the shock value and, the crazy things happening. And so I think for a lot of people, it was just like, yeah, cool movie. But maybe the deeper reflection of other women in maybe less bloody circumstances also feel the same way, where they don't have to forgive. They don't have to, accept the circumstances around them. And seeing more of that, less Tarantino-esque, but seeing
Mhm.
more of that emotion being tapped into, I think is something that people can really get behind, and have shown that they like to see in the past.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of my like feelings with what I just said come from the fact that it is filtered down to me that the ending of my book has people very split. And I think that's because again, I don't want to give anything away, but I think a lot of people would have preferred it to end the opposite way, is my gut feeling. I don't read my own reviews. I stay out of that space to protect myself, but also just to respect readers. But that is filtered down to me. And I can't help but think that's why, because I think given that, like you said, if we're talking about something that's like more gory and cinematic and sensationalized, I think maybe there's more leeway there. But since this is like small town, rural America, like suspense novel, kind of emotionally driven, I think we want the emotional arc to have that like satisfying, like, and she grew and she forgave and now everything is fine. And I'm like, well, maybe not everything is fine, So that's I'm gonna have to watch Kill Bill now. But
Please, there's two movies.
okay, and I'll have to tell my dad. I don't know how he'll feel about me watching a movie called Kill Bill.
Just have a full movie night.
I know, really, actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah, invite him over. Says it's not about you. We're just having a good time.
There's no subliminal messaging, Dad, I promise.
Absolutely none. um, no, but I think when you have your setting as a small town, there is this element of it's more realistic in a way where people see themselves a little bit more.
Yeah.
They're not, the Uma Thurman with the sword going around, running around, killing people. It's, this is my neighbor, this is my friend, this is the scandal from down the street.
Yeah.
And so you expect more realistic, quote unquote, responses. And that brings with it the moral value judgment, the societal norms of, well, you're a woman, well, you're this, well, you're that. In order for everyone to collectively just be peaceful and happy, you have to have this response. And your feelings might be invalidated because you might be going against that and saying, no, I don't want to forgive that person. Why should I?
Yeah, and there is one person who she is able to forgive. Actually, there's two people that have wronged her very deeply that she is able to forgive, but there's also others that she is not. And I think that speaks to, in real life, there are certain people that you can take the time to heal and forgive, but other times other times I think it's okay to hold on to those feelings. I don't think people are entitled to your forgiveness. I think ultimately it's, how do you feel about it? If it would heal you to forgive, then that's okay. But if it wouldn't heal you, I don't think you're under any obligation to do that. But to go back to what you said about the rural setting and how that can be more intimate, you can imagine that as your neighbor. And I think there's something inherently uncomfortable about, like, oh, I wouldn't want my neighbor to be someone who tried to kill their mom and went to prison. You know what I mean? Like, you already kind of have that moral judgment about her, which I'm aware not everyone likes Providence, to which I would say, well, she did try to kill her mom. I wasn't trying to make her like super likable. So I always find that really funny when I hear that. But yeah, I think she's battling against a lot of like social stigmas about like not really loving your parents, being deeply estranged, having gone to prison. We could have a whole conversation about how society treats incarcerated people and especially incarcerated women. But yeah, I think there's something uncomfortable imagining that someone like her could be in your life, even though the same thing with other people who have committed crimes or had traumatic upbringings. She's still a fully fledged person. She still has a lot of really wonderful traits. I think she loves her sister. She's a very loyal friend. And just like the totality of her humanity. The rage is really important, but there's so much else to her that I think makes her ultimately human.
Well, I think just to touch briefly on the experience of incarcerated people, I think a lot of individuals, they don't see prison as a justified or a sufficient enough response to whatever the crime is. And so somebody goes to prison for X amount of years, they come out, it's like, well, they're still a bad person. It's like, well, they've been punished. They have received the consequences of whatever the action was by the law, whether or not they're innocent or not, that's a different subject. But like,
Mhm.
they have received the consequences as deemed by the law. They're out. People really struggle with, well, I don't care. I don't want to give them a job. I don't want to give them housing because they did this. And it's like, well, but they've already received the consequences of their actions. The consequences of their action wasn't, okay, well, now you never get home. Now you never get this. Now you don't get a paycheck. Now you don't get a family. Now you're not allowed to, interact with certain individuals. And so I think that tension of where's that forgiveness? It's that other running theme of, well, if somebody has already been punished and received the punishment that the law has dictated is the punishment, doesn't that mean that they now enter a space where they can be forgiven? They can now rebuild that life? Or how does that like actually interplay? And so I think it's a really important topic to discuss. And it's something I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about, especially if they don't know somebody who is either incarcerated or formerly incarcerated.
Yeah, I mean, it's and Providence in her internal monologue talks about this. It's not just I went to prison for 5 years and I got out. It's now I can't get a good job. Now I live in a halfway house. Now I can't get a decent apartment. Like the universe, I shouldn't say the universe, but this country's America never really stops punishing people who were incarcerated. In a lot of states, you still can't vote, which is the whole thing is completely insane. Like when I think about it, I get genuinely upset. And I think what you said about society not being willing to forgive is also an important part of this book, because people do hold that over her head. Like, you tried to kill your mom, you went to prison. And she's like, yeah, I went to prison and now I'm out. And in this scenario, she has a decent job. She's a tattoo artist. She's like, I make a living. I make a living. I live independently. I've kept out of trouble. I pay my taxes. I vote. And yet people still cannot move on from the fact that she did this. And it's something I haven't had the chance to really talk about, is the expectation of forgiveness for her, but then on the other side of the coin, society not being willing to forgive her. And yeah, I have to stop, because otherwise I will start going on a rant about especially formerly incarcerated women. And I think we think of formerly incarcerated people as being like morally black instead of morally gray. Like, you did this horrible thing, you were convicted, you are a bad person, which is not necessarily true. And I think we like women who are morally gray, but we don't like women who are morally black. So we're conditioned already to think of these women as evil monsters. And we ignore the fact that they're still people and they still have stories that are worthy of being told.
Oh, absolutely. And I think It's really a call to question of where is the moral value judgment, where, as we have been saying time and again, where is the bar of forgiveness? And also, especially in the realm for like complete strangers, why is it their duty to forgive somebody who they have no personal connection to? They hear a story in a newspaper, or they hear, oh, did you hear this person did that?
Yeah.
Like, if you're not, intimately connected, like if it wasn't your aunt who was run over by the car, if it wasn't like your best friend, what relationship do you have? And is it your responsibility to forgive when you weren't even associated to begin with?
Exactly, because I think in real life, I would look at that if I wasn't involved in any way and say, well, that's not for me to judge. That's not for me to forgive. I wasn't involved in that. But I think, and this could be maybe attributed to just generally the American fascination with true crime, is that I think we like to pass a lot of judgment on this and we like to consume it as entertainment. And we ultimately like to be judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to this kind of thing. And I think that's deeply, deeply unhealthy. And I wish that we could take more of a step back and realize that we it doesn't always involve us. We do not have to be part of every single conversation surrounding something like that. Because again, in real life, if this happened, this is not my crime to forgive. I'm not involved. I am just a bystander. And in real life, I wish more people might take that approach when these things happen.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's one of the very compelling parts of your story where you're really digging into this societal expectation, but also the reaction of somebody who's experiencing it, and who has the right to forgive, and why, or rather, how is that forgiveness validated between the people who are experiencing it?
Exactly.
Something that's really particularly interesting about forgiveness, especially just in our current time period, there's a lot of the proper way to apologize, the proper way to show remorse, the proper way to, actually show that, you are ready to do the thing. Um, I feel very recently there's been so much almost therapy speak of this is the way that I must apologize. I have taken this step and this step and this step, but it feels
Mhm.
so um inorganic.
Yeah.
Um and yet that's like the script, and now you can just hear it every time someone makes a mistake somewhere. They have this script that they've said, and it just doesn't
Post
feel.
their notes app apology.
Yeah, you almost like sitting, you see the videos, so sometimes it looks like they're like in a hostage situation, like reading this thing out, and it's just like, are you sure you really understand what's going on?
Yeah.
Um, because we've been talking so much about forgiveness, when somebody has done something that they do deserve or do need to express, if they feel that way, their regrets or their apologies, how do you think those apologies need to be professed, and what is the responsibility of others to actually forgive that person?
I think if you're the one asking for forgiveness, the number one thing is taking accountability. And I think actually specifically using the words I'm sorry, because whenever I watch TV or I see something like that and people have had an argument, I will notice how often people don't just simply say, I'm sorry. And I think those two words do carry a lot of weight. I think they do show at least some level of remorse if you genuinely mean it. Obviously, people can say that and not mean it. But I think the number one thing is accountability. And then for the person being asked for their forgiveness, I think ultimately we have to remember no one is obligated to forgive you. And that's a theme that's touched on a little bit later in Every Sweet Thing is Bitter, between Providence and somebody that she loves. It's you can want someone to forgive you, but ultimately they don't have to. They can listen and they can appreciate you saying it and you taking accountability. But at the end of the day, they don't have to accept it. And I think it's ultimately up to you. Like, will it heal you to forgive this person? I don't think you really have to take into account anything other than that. I think forgiveness is deeply personal.
When you say someone needs to take accountability, what does that actually look like?
I think acknowledging the harm that you've done to somebody and recognizing that your actions have consequences and seeing in this case, running over her mother becomes addicted to painkillers because she has a lot of different injuries that don't heal, and she continues using alcohol. And whether or not Providence gets the opportunity to apologize to her mother, I will leave that vague. But acknowledging that what you did hurt somebody, and accepting that as real and valid, and not just like, yeah, I understand, I hurt you, blah, blah, blah. But your actions have an impact, and regardless of how deep it cuts, it still did cut. And I think that's the most important part, is truly acknowledging and accepting that you have harmed somebody.
Earlier, when we were talking about the back of book blurb, the theme was revenge or redemption. Now that we're talking about accountability, is there a pathway for everyone to be redeemed? Is it only if you do a certain steps to earn redemption? How do you earn redemption? How does that theme of redemption either play out in the book, or just in general, what is the scope of it while you're working in this particular field?
I feel like a lot of what I wanted to explore was if revenge and redemption can coexist. And I don't want to spoil anything, but I found that journey very fascinating to go on. And as far as I think the steps you can take toward redemption, again, we always have to accept that maybe that's not possible, because it probably requires the forgiveness of somebody else to be redeemed. And maybe that doesn't happen. But I think the steps on the journey to redemption are going to be very individualized. It's going to depend on who did you hurt, how deeply did you hurt them, can they forgive you, do they want to? So I think that's extremely case by case. And I think redemption too can also be a personal internal arc. I think you can also go on your own journey of trying to atone and trying to make things right. And that I don't think has to require the forgiveness of anyone else. I think inwardly you can say, I did this terrible thing. I've done what I can to try to heal and make up for the harm that I've done. And I think you can kind of have an internal redemption as well. I think that's a much more quiet and understated journey, but I think that can be very healing for you as the individual.
This may be a controversial question.
Okay, I'm so ready. Go.
Okay. When somebody has done something wrong and they've apologized and they're on a path for redemption, the person they are trying to be redeemed in the eyes of has a certain power over them, because they're the ones who gets to forgive or not forgive. And the terms that they dictate of, all right, well, I'll forgive you if you do X, Y, Z. They may or may not be valid. They may be like, I'll forgive you if you jump off that cliff. That's the extreme example, but like sometimes the path to redemption might be something that could actually harm further the person who committed the wrong in the first place.
Mm.
When you're dealing with redemption, when you're dealing with trying to earn forgiveness, where does the line get crossed of saying, you know what? It's not worth it for me to proceed at this point. It's not worth it for me to try to be redeemed at this point, because I'm never going to actually earn your forgiveness. This is just, a facade of you trying to punish me more.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting question. And again, I have to say that I think that's probably like deeply individualized. And it's up to you as the person trying to earn the redemption, trying to earn the forgiveness, to decide, am I just going to do more harm to myself? Am I going to be harming more people to try to get this person's forgiveness? And I think you are also allowed to walk away from that and say, you know what? No, this is not, you're asking something absurd of me, and I'm not going to do that. And there is something sort of, I don't want to use the word absurd, but Providence is asked to do something that is a lot to partially get someone's forgiveness. And she makes the decision to do it. And in the end, does that actually result in the forgiveness? Does it not? I don't know. You'll have to agree to or read to find out. But that is something that she's asked to do, and she decides, that might be worth it for me, that might not. And God, this is such an interesting question, and I wish I could give like a more like solid response, but I think it's so there's so many factors at play. Like, who's asking you? What are they asking? How do you feel about it? What did you do? Like, did you like steal a pencil from them and now they're asking you to like, like what's the extent of the thing you're asking for forgiveness for, and how far are you willing to go?
Like you said, I think it is very individual. I think it's very much the circumstances around it, who's asking. But I think another factor is not that we'll ever be able to mathematically pinpoint this down, but like, what is the percentage of forgiveness that action is actually going to get you? Is the person being genuine when they say, you know what, you do this one thing and I'll forgive you? Or is it just like moving the bar a little bit further? Moving
Yeah.
all right, keep doing more, keep doing more. I'll take a step back, you take a step forward, on the continual act of redemption that will never actually be legitimate.
Yeah, and I think that's like moving the goalposts and really weaponizing forgiveness is something that people do. um yeah, this is fascinating, and I wish we could mathematically like get a spectrum of that. I think this is suddenly I need to write this down. Maybe I'll put this in a book one day.
Well, like in a video game, you can see like your forgiveness meter. Like you do enough, side quests, your forgiveness meter goes up a
You
little
see
bit.
the relationship bar like on The Sims.
Yeah, if you've hurt somebody enough that, the liking is all the way at zero, but then you have to, earn it back until
Yeah.
eventually, you get to a certain point. But maybe the reminder is like, -50 toxicity and it goes back down to zero. Because I
Your
think that's
relationship's back in the red.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think people are really changeable. And also, like the individual who's doing the forgiving, how much have they done the work themselves to say,
Mhm.
I've told this person verbally that I forgive them, but secretly I'm going to resent them for the rest of my life anyway. Secretly, I'm going to wait for that moment for them to, break a glass before I say, you always do this, and then, restart the toxicity because the forgiveness isn't really there, even though on page or by voice they've said they forgive them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something else too, is that someone can say like, hey, I forgive you for this, but they can always hold on to that little like nugget of anger and resentment. And there's nothing you can do about that nugget of anger and resentment. If they've said they've forgiven you, like that will always be there. And I think that can get into like grudge holding and the expectation to always let go. And there are some things that you can't let go of, whether that's valid or not. And in some ways, I think it's like it is the trying that counts to some extent, but forgiveness is so it's not linear. I think is like the ultimate takeaway is there's not like, okay, if you follow steps A, B, C, and D, you will achieve 100% forgiveness. Like the roadmap can be it can go in so many different directions, and ultimately like you can still, I don't want to say fail, but if we're talking video game terms, you can fail this quest at the end. um they'll say like you got a 99% success chance, and then you do not pass that speech check and they don't forgive you, like
They're not going to join you in the final battle as your ally.
no, they will not join your party for questing.
Not going to happen. To make it slightly more humorous, I I have one of my favorite just anecdotal stories. What I saw somewhere online was somebody was being really snotty in a public place. Maybe it was at a barista or something like that. And the opposing person, who was like a complete stranger to whomever was being very snotty, their response to this behavior was, I forgive you. And it was very funny just because like I can see someone being completely taken aback by that. Like, what are you forgiving me for? And then
Oh
like
yeah, you realize I was looking for your forgiveness.
the
Yeah.
mental process of like, are they now going to have to internalize, have I done something that earns forgiveness? Like this
Mhm.
psychological warfare that just saying, I forgive you, of like where that comes across.
That really is like the first shot in like psychological warfare. That's intense. I kind of respect that.
Yeah, it's just like this very like, I forgive you. Like, for what? So yes, forgiveness can be a weapon if used appropriately.
Mhm. And in scenarios like that, I'm okay with that. Someone's got to put people in their place. And what a polite way to do it.
Very polite, very just, I forgive you.
Mhm.
Um, to go back just a little bit, you had mentioned there was, religious trauma kind of cycling through some of this story. One thing I noticed was the names of your characters.
Mhm.
You have Providence, Harmony, Grace. Why did you choose these particular names, and what did they mean for you while you were putting them in the story?
So originally, when I picked Providence's name, in early versions of the story, she had a really normal name. She was like Isabel, something like that. And I wasn't connecting with the name. And I specifically wanted to pick a name for her that you couldn't get a nickname from, because what are you going to call someone named Providence? You're not going to call her Prov. She's always
Rhode
going to be
Island.
Providence.
I don't know.
And she doesn't have a middle name. So she is quite literally just stuck being Providence forever. She doesn't have any other thing that she can be called. And she talks about her name being her parents' first act of cruelty against her, giving her this really weird name that she can never escape. And then for her younger sisters, I also had to think, well, if you have a daughter named Providence, you're not going to name the other ones Jane and Amy. So I went with the theme of virtue names, and as like a fun Easter egg, Harmony in like earlier drafts, her original name was Verity, and a little known author named Colleen Hoover might have used that name before me, so I had to change it because I was like, no one's ever going to think of anything but the Colleen Hoover book.
I have to admit, I've never read Colleen Hoover, and the only thing I know about her is by listening to like book reviewers, because there's been so many people who just like that's the only thing I know about that particular book is listening to really talented book reviewers go on like hours long discussions about this book.
I've watched them too on YouTube. I feel like we may have watched some of the same ones.
With
But
Cindy did a really good one.
who did?
With Cindy.
Okay, I know with Cindy, but I don't think I've seen this video. Okay, I
She
know what.
did she went on a thing where she did a bunch of Colleen Hoover things and her reactions were absolutely fantastic.
Okay, I'm gonna have to watch this later. I have to say, my agent used to edit Colleen Hoover's books. My agent worked for oh, I forget the imprint. I know it was at Simon and Schuster, but she was Colleen Hoover's editor for a really long time. So
But was she the one who told you we can't use Verity?
Oh no, actually I made that change on my own. I think I don't think anyone would have told me to change it, but I was like, I was like, that name, it's so loaded. It's like one of those things. It would be like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but it's one of those names that's so distinctive that I think it would always just bring to mind a different character for people.
Fair enough. I admit when you were telling me about your, book graph of, what type of mood you are, you said misery, and immediately Stephen King came to mind.
I've
So
never read Misery. I've seen the movie a couple times, but I
see,
haven't
I've
read the
never
book.
seen the movie.
Okay. It's a good movie. It's very tense, and it gives me the creeps in a good way.
I think that's what it should do.
Exactly. No, it's perfect, but I have a much higher tolerance for dark books than dark movies.
Oh,
Um,
same.
yeah, which is funny. Actually, I watch a lot of dark TV show. I don't know. I'm gonna have to talk about this in therapy at some point. There's something more to like pick at here for sure.
Oh, your book itself has some dark themes in it. So like if we just stay here for a second, like when you're creating a dark world or when you're writing in the darkness, there is a difference between the book and then the sensorial input of a movie or a TV show where it's a little bit more forgiving, it's a little bit more comfortable, it's a little safer, you can just close it and you don't have, the sensory
Yeah.
input. Um, but as a writer and a reader, what compels you for the dark?
I agree completely with what you're saying, that a dark book is so much more forgiving because you can limit your own imagination. You can read the most graphic scene ever and you don't have to picture that if you don't want to. And I love that. um I think that's one of the reasons I'm able to get away with it, is that I don't have to specifically watch something horrible with my eyeballs. But as far as like exploring why I find it so compelling, I I think part of it is just that, and in a way that I say this, I'm very fortunate that I've never had those experiences. I was raised by loving parents. I was not neglected or abused, and I don't want to explore my own story because there's nothing there for me in for fiction. I've lived that experience, but I I like plumbing the depths of what people are capable of and sort of everyday evil, because Providence's father is abusive and in many ways, and neglectful, and he runs a liquor store that sells alcohol to a dry Indian reservation, is just very evil in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways where I think you could envision this as a real person. You could envision someone like that living among you. And I find that fascinating, that you will never know just how, there's some statistic like the average person will walk by 13 murderers in their lifetime, something like that. It might not be 13, but it's something like that. And I don't know how true it is, but I'm sure we've all walked by a murderer and just haven't known it. And there's something about that, like the everyday evil that you may encounter but not see, that I find really interesting. You don't know what's going on in your neighbors' homes. You don't know what's happening across the street from you. And there's something about that that's so ordinary, but also so frightening, and very fascinating for me to explore as a writer.
There's that um, kind of a tangible fear that you tap into where you're not sure what's going on around you, but something could be there. It's that fear of the dark almost that
Mhm.
lurks everywhere, because you don't know what's there, you don't know what's out there, but the back of your mind, little lizard brain who's like responsible for your safety is going, what if there's a puma behind that shed?
Exactly, exactly. And I think some of it is also the exploration of, we like to think that if something horrible was happening in your neighbor's house and you thought someone was being abused or something else was happening, that you would say something and speak up. And also just the ordinary evil of people knowing that something horrible is going on and not speaking up. I think there are so many examples of that, with bystander effect and things like that. But the exploration of, I think we all want to believe that at the end of the day, we're very moral and we will do the right thing. And I think a lot of us just inherently overestimate that about ourselves. I think a lot of us like to keep our head in the sand and say, well, like that doesn't involve me. I don't want to upset my neighbor and I don't want to rock the boat.
Well, I think that goes back to whose value judgment, whose moral barometer. Like, for
Mhm.
instance, there are people who will say, if that man is beating that child, then that child deserved it. The beating wouldn't happen if that child hadn't, done whatever they did. And if that child needs to learn respect because then the beating wouldn't happen. Um, and that is certainly one point of view, where another point of view is say, no, under no circumstances should that person beat that child. Like,
Yeah, which is what I was about to say. I was like, just to, like, in this hypothetical scenario, chime in. I don't think we should ever beat children.
oh no, no, absolutely not. Yeah, like
I
I'm not.
know, and I know you weren't trying to. I just had to like make that. I was like, I just want to say I'm anti-beating children. That's really bad. Let's not ever put hands on our children, actually.
Absolutely, I am not justifying that position at all. But there are people out there who do have that point of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
think it's one of the reasons why books like this are so valuable because you get to see all those different interior thoughts, motivations, um, responses to I've been beaten. This was a situation I never deserved it.
Mhm.
Like could have been the worst child in the world, never deserved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of her trying to, there's a scene where her friend says to her, like, you didn't deserve anything that happened to you. And she says, yeah, I know. And she's like, yeah, but I don't think anyone's ever said that to you, that you didn't ever deserve any of the horrible things that you went through because you were a child. And even if you were an adult, you didn't deserve any of that. But I think it's interesting, again, like you said, where everyone draws that moral line, because some people are okay with things like that, and which again blows my mind, that what some people are okay with. But yeah, the what appalls you and me might not appall uh, James down the street. We'll never know.
And that's also for somebody to come to terms with. Like, are you okay with the fact that James down the street is perfectly comfortable being a bystander to evil?
Yeah.
Because that is also a choice where you accept that of somebody. Or do you say, you know what, I'm not okay with anybody being a bystander. If you're not willing to step up, then I don't need you at all.
Yeah, and I think like a lesser theme at play is the amount of people, like I said earlier when we were talking about religious trauma, in Providence's life, who could see that, she's undernourished, and like, why does she have bruises? She talks about when she was a child, the amount of people that had to see that and not step in. And there's a lot of fear surrounding her father. Her father is like the big bully of the town, and he in the ensuing years between Providence going to prison and coming back, he shot another guy in the neck, and he's still out and about, and people are genuinely terrified of him. But the most people do for her, she has kind of like a surrogate father who in a limited way is able to help her, like gives her like gifts on Christmas, gives her an extra sandwich for school, and like helps in a way. But then we get to the question of, is that ever enough? Is it okay to just do what you can, or can you do more? Does it put your own safety in jeopardy? And to what degree are you still a bystander because you're still allowing it to continue?
It's a breeding ground for resentment of why didn't you do more? Why didn't you step in when you had the chance? You knew this was happening. Is a sandwich going to fix my broken arm, my this, my that?
Right.
Thank you for the sandwich, but I needed a cup. I needed this. I needed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
What inspired you to write this particular story?
This is kind of a long-winded origin story, but I really love telling it. This was 2019, and I was working at a winery, and I did compliance. So I had to make sure that all of our licenses were up to date. We tracked everything for the government, for all the states we shipped into. If it sounds boring, it's because it was. I like the first week of the month, I'd be super busy running my reports, and then for the next 3 weeks of the month, I would be like, oh my God, I have nothing to do. So I would just like wait for the 8 hours to pass. It was terrible. I only worked there like 6 months or so. If anyone sees this, thanks for the job, but it wasn't great. Nothing against them. The job was just really boring. But I would just to like make the hours pass, I was like, okay, I'm going to read articles about winery compliance. And, I'll say I'm doing research and I'm learning from my job. And I came upon an article about dry counties in the United States, because there are still a lot of places in the US where you cannot purchase alcohol. And a lot of them are like Texas, Arkansas, Appalachia. But if you look at a map, there's like one little tiny spot in South Dakota. And so naturally, my autism brain sees that one spot, and I'm like, there's a story here, and I have to know what it is. And I would come to find out that tiny dot was home to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And I would then go down the rabbit hole of learning about how there was a teeny tiny town across the Nebraska border called White Clay, Nebraska, that had 9 people and 3 liquor stores. And their liquor stores would sell millions of cans of beer every single year. And their primary purchasers were the people from the dry reservation. And obviously, we could have a whole discussion about Indian reservations and how we have mistreated, would be putting it mildly, Native American people throughout American history, and continue to do so on reservations. But Pine Ridge is particularly, there's a lot of poverty there. The mortality rate is very high, and alcoholism is a huge, huge, huge problem there. And I became really fascinated by that story, and also by just, again, like the ordinary casual villainy of these people running these liquor stores and not caring that it was blood money, and not caring that they were contributing to this epidemic of alcoholism and death to other human beings. And I want to say there was an ongoing legal battle. It was still ongoing when I wrote this, where they were trying to get those liquor stores shut down. And I believe that has been resolved, and those liquor stores no longer operate. So it did end up, as far as I know, unless something else has happened in the ensuing years, has something of a happy ending. It doesn't fix all of the problems on Pine Ridge, but it makes things better. And I think it's a rare win for the government in the 2020s. But I became, again, really fascinated by that casual villainy. And that was where a lot of the inspiration from Tom came from, because obviously he has to have a job. He has to do something in town. And I'm like, okay, perfect. That's what he's going to do. And then if I was going to give him that role, I wanted to pay some sort of homage, for lack of a better word, to the Pine Ridge Reservation. And that's why part of this book takes place on the Long Grass Reservation, which is my again, I don't want to say homage, but my way of incorporating that real story into this book, because as a white woman, I'm not Indigenous. It was not my story to tell specifically about the liquor stores. It was not my story to center that. But if I was going to make that part of Tom's character, I couldn't do that without including that as a subplot and as background. So that's where the inspiration really came from, the setting. I'm very setting forward. If I can't picture where a book is taking place, I can't write it. And the setting just There's not a lot of books that take place in the Nebraska Panhandle, and yeah, I just became really fascinated by it, and it all just blossomed from there.
It's there's so much in there. I definitely have to look up the situation afterwards to just get my own information because I can absolutely see how that research trail would have gotten you there, and then where that, that sounds really interesting, could have formed.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. There were a lot of articles about it, and I learned a lot that I kind of can't believe I didn't know before. It was just really appalling and saddening. And again, I'm glad this real life story had something of a happy ending. I'm glad that uh, to some degree justice was served. It's not perfect, but it's something.
Before I let you go, is there anything we haven't had a chance to talk about today that you would like to mention?
No, honestly, I feel good.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Lindsey Byrd in Writing is Hard. Samantha Crewson's book, Every Sweet Thing is Bitter, is already available. Check out the description on where you can find it. If you like this content, please do like, share, and subscribe as we look forward to bringing you more. Wishing you all the best. Bye-bye.